You were never meant to hear this. And by the time you finish, you won't be the same man. Behind every empire, every church, every institution that tells you it was built on virtue, there's a crypt. And in that crypt are stories sealed with blood, silence, and a fear so potent that even history dares not record it. What I'm about to tell you is one of those stories. A story buried so deep beneath layers of myth, state archives, and burned records that only whispers remain. But whispers are enough, because whispers, when followed, lead to the Hollow Manor, and to the family that history tried to forget. The Ashfords. You've heard the name if you've studied colonial land records, obscure medical journals from the 1800s, or the testimony of women locked away in sanitariums for seeing what they shouldn't have. But even then, what you've read is nothing but ash, remnants scorched clean of meaning. What survives in fragments. A medical diagram without a name, a diary entry torn mid-sentence, a census that lists 3 women and 247 who entered their home but never left. Tonight, we'll not only piece together the truth, we'll rip off the veil. This is not just a tale of madness. It is not merely the corruption of religion or the misuse of science. This is systemic, ritualistic, purposeful. For 30 years in the forests of Maine, 3 women operated a structure known publicly as the Convent of Eternal Tears. But it wasn't a convent. It was a mechanism. A machine built to do one thing: break the will of women who threatened the established order, and rebuild them into something else. You might think, it's just a story. But I warn you, stories like this only surface when the seal cracks. And when they do, those who listen begin to see the same patterns elsewhere. You'll feel it, you'll know. Because once you understand what happened inside the Hollow Manor, you'll never look at obedience, at medicine, at faith the same again. This isn't history. This is a mirror, held up to the darkest corners of power, religion, and control. The Ashford women weren't mad. They were methodical, and everything they did had a purpose. Welcome to Whispers from the Hollow Manor. We begin now, 1798. The wilderness of Maine was not merely untamed, it was lawless. A place where settlers vanished into the trees without trace, and rumors traveled faster than justice. That year, on an October morning thick with fog and silence, the Ashford sisters arrived. Not as pilgrims, not as settlers, but as architects of something far darker. They came not in poverty, but with gold, not in humility, but with purpose. Their wagon rolled into the town of Millbridge drawn by 2 black mares, its wheels caked in red mud from trails locals never used. What they carried inside the covered carriage wasn't luggage. It was equipment. Medical crates marked with European emblems, instruments of surgical precision, glass canisters of mercury, opium, and powdered roots no local healer could name. The townspeople were charmed, or perhaps disarmed, by their appearance. Agatha Ashford, the matriarch, moved like royalty in mourning. Her voice had the weight of scripture. Prudence, her sister, silent and cold, watched like an executioner watches the condemned. And Temperance, too young, too beautiful, with a smile that belonged not to this world, smiled at children in a way that made them cry later, in their sleep. They claimed they were Anglican nuns, exiled by corruption in the English church, seeking refuge to build a sanctuary for women lost to sin. And the town welcomed them, because the Ashfords promised order. In a land of chaos, that was irresistible. Within weeks, they purchased 200 acres of forest land from a desperate widow, paid triple, no questions asked. Every available builder was hired, but the structure they designed wasn't a chapel, it was a fortress. 3 stories of cold stone, cut not for beauty but for containment, windows too narrow to escape, doors built not just to lock but to hold under pressure, ventilation shafts deeper than needed, and below, all of it, a basement, excavated with such precision it swallowed weeks of labor and hundreds of pounds of quarried rock. No chapel required that. No convent explained it. When questioned, Agatha would smile, her eyes unblinking. Solitude, she said, requires silence. Silence requires structure. And healing requires isolation. The people accepted her words like scripture, but some began to whisper, because in every town there's someone who notices things. A boy who hears weeping in the trees, a hunter who sees candles burning underground, a doctor who starts asking questions but then stops. You see, the Ashfords weren't hiding. They were building something, and soon the townspeople would start sending their daughters there, willingly. It began with small stories: a girl who refused marriage, a wife who challenged her husband's business, a daughter caught reading Rousseau or worse, Mary Wollstonecraft, women who would not kneel, women who refused to be silenced. And so the town whispered, "Send her to the sisters." It was easy. Just a note passed to the Reverend, a quiet conversation with Dr. Hartwell, a pouch of coins exchanged under candlelight. No public shame, no courts, no bruises, just absence. The Hollow Manor, as it came to be known only in private, offered spiritual restoration. Families were told their women would return docile, repentant, cured. And some did return, eventually. But they were not the same. Their eyes didn't move like they used to. Their laughter, if it came at all, was hollow. They obeyed without being told. They smiled without reason. They stared too long at nothing, and others never came back. The explanations varied. One drowned in the creek behind the manor. Another took her own life in a fit of spiritual possession. One succumbed to fever. But always the sisters wrote letters, handwritten, elegant, sorrowful. Apologies laced with scripture. She is with God now. She found peace. Her soul was not ready for healing. No one questioned, because questioning meant trouble. Questioning meant your own wife, your own daughter, might be seen as unruly. Questioning was the first step toward being sent. Dr. Hartwell, who first praised the Ashfords' advanced medical understanding, stopped speaking publicly about their methods. He no longer made rounds with them, but he continued sending them patients, and he continued cashing their gold. Because, you see, what the Ashfords were doing wasn't just spiritual, it was clinical, it was procedural, and it was profitable. The basement, according to scarce testimony and scorched documents, was not a place of PET. Rare. It was a surgical chamber, reinforced, sanitized, locked from the outside. Women were restrained, not cradled, observed, not comforted, opened, literally, and rewritten. What were they doing? Psychosurgery, hypnosis, chemical suppression, or something far older, rituals buried under the mask of medicine? One survivor, decades later, wrote in her journal, "They took my name from me. I don't remember it. I only answer when they say, 'Subject.' I remember light. I remember pain. I remember them saying, 'You'll thank us when it's over.' She didn't thank them. She clawed her wrists until she bled. Then she disappeared again. What kind of healing begins by erasing the soul? What kind of church builds a prison underground? The Hollow Manor didn't treat rebellion. It harvested obedience. Millbridge slept while horrors worked in silence beneath its soil. By day, the Ashford sisters moved like saints, feeding the poor, aiding births, blessing the market. But by night, their stone cathedral became something else, and what it did to the women sent there, what it extracted from them, was nothing short of soul dissection. We've all heard the phrase, breaking a horse. But what happens when you try to break a human mind? You start by isolating them. Days of silence, light that never changes, meals served at irregular hours. Time becomes elastic. A woman begins to doubt how long she's been there. Then, denial of identity. No mirrors, no spoken name, no response unless she answers to the number stitched on her nightgown. Next, sleep deprivation. Wake her at midnight with cold water, interrupt her at dawn with screams, don't let her rest, not fully. Then, bring in the voices. Some survivors recall this phase, long corridors lined with whispering speakers hidden behind walls, chanting in Latin, recordings of their own confessions, played back, distorted. The effect is devastating. Eventually, the woman begins speaking her guilt aloud, not because she believes it, but because she needs the whispering to stop. That's when the real work begins. Sister Prudence, trained in medicine, or perhaps in something older, began her treatments around the 4th week. Her tools, trephines, syringes, surgical clamps. Testimony recovered from Dr. Hartwell's destroyed journals described a technique he referred to only as the submission method. It involved minor incisions made behind the ear, where, he claimed, the moral compass is most responsive to pain. That's not science. That's doctrine carved into skin. Temperance, the youngest, was responsible for what she called reintegration. She read to the patients, scripture, yes, but also Ashford family writings no outsider has ever been allowed to see. One recovered fragment speaks of the removal of unnecessary selfhood. It likens ego to a tumor, something to be excised. Who wrote this? Who trained them? There are letters, barely preserved, between Agatha Ashford and an unnamed benefactor in Europe. The seal bears a strange sigil, an inverted crozier entwined with a serpent eating its tail. We've traced it, not to Rome, but to Venice, and deeper, to pre-Christian ritual orders known for psychological manipulation masked as divine instruction. They weren't rogue nuns, they were operatives. Do you understand now? This wasn't about healing, it was about reprogramming the female mind, systematically, with institutional precision. And the question you should ask is, why were so many powerful men willing to pay for it? The deeper you descend into this history, the more you realize this wasn't isolated madness, it was orchestrated obedience. Between 1800 and 1830, over 600 women entered the Hollow Manor. Less than half returned. Of those who did, none ever spoke publicly about what happened inside. Not even once. No lawsuits, no protests, just silence, and in many cases early death. But one testimony slipped through, hidden in a sealed box in the Maine State Archives labeled Irregular Admission, Convent Inquiry, 1821. It was found decades later by a junior clerk who had no idea what he was reading. The document was a confession written by a woman listed only as Subject M. The final page had this line scratched in blood. They took my voice, but not my knowing. Subject M described procedures, rituals as she called them, meant to fracture her sense of self. She spoke of being forced to recite prayers backward, of mirrors that didn't reflect, and a room she called the Hollow. Inside it, she said, her memories were stripped from her, not forgotten, but taken. It gets worse. She mentioned the masking rite. A final ceremony performed on women who resisted. They were made to kneel, surrounded by hooded figures. Their faces were covered with wax, melted slowly over the skin while they were made to repeat the phrase, "I am not mine, I am now made." And here's the part that will twist your stomach. Subject M escaped. She got out. She ran barefoot through the forest for 2 days before being found by a trapper. Her hair was scorched, her feet blistered raw. She spoke in tongues for a week before her mind cleared, and when it did, she vanished. Records show she was admitted to the Boston Lunatic Hospital under a false name, but 1 year later she disappeared from their registry. No discharge, no death. Just gone. Now here's what chills me. 3 months after her disappearance, new legislation was quietly passed in Massachusetts authorizing religious institutions to detain women for moral correction without court approval, if referred by a physician or clergyman. Do you understand what that means? Subject M wasn't just a survivor, she was a threat to an entire system. And when she spoke, the system closed ranks, because what the Ashford sisters created in Maine wasn't a secret, they were a prototype, and the state made sure the prototype could expand. If you've made it this far, you're not just a viewer anymore, you're an initiate, And you need to understand something. This wasn't just about the Ashfords. It wasn't just one manor. This was the bare testing ground for something much larger. What began in the forests of Maine was codified, institutionalized, and scaled. The Hollow Manor wasn't destroyed, it was replicated. Let me show you how. In 1832, 7 years after the last recorded disappearance in Millbridge, a facility opened in upstate New York known as the House of Temperance and Divine Order. Its founding charter was nearly identical to the Ashford sisters' original declarations: spiritual healing for disobedient women, restoration of moral clarity, and most disturbingly, removal of mental interference. Same language, same structure, same methods. Its founding board included 2 names, Reverend Elias Harker and a physician named Dr. Jonah Pell. Now Pell had studied in London at the Royal Institute for Behavioral Science, which at the time was an underground society known for neurological reform of prostitutes, beggars, and mentally ill women, procedures that were unregulated, unpublished, and while protected by the Crown. You think this sounds conspiratorial? Good. That means your instincts are still alive. In the margins of one letter from Pell to Reverend Harker, found locked in a personal estate trunk and auctioned in 1911, he scribbled the words, "Ashford method holds, suppression before suggestion, divide before reintegration, hollow them, then fill." Let me repeat that. Hollow them, then fill. That's not therapy. That's not salvation. That's psychological erasure. And what's worse is that this framework didn't stay inside rural asylums. It moved into education, into religious training, into military psychological conditioning. Same tactics: isolation, disorientation, ritual, and finally, obedience. What if I told you these methods, refined over centuries, are still used today? Modern behavioral modification centers, detention facilities, select elite training camps, fraternity hazing, cult recruitment, even some tech startup onboarding procedures. I'm not saying they all know the origins, but the methods, they're the same. You see, once a system learns how to strip identity, it doesn't forget, it evolves. The Ashfords didn't fail. They succeeded so well, the world adopted their blueprint. It just changed the language. It's no longer called the Hollow. Now it's called the Process. Are you ready to go further? Every system of control starts with a lie. Not a blatant one. No, something subtle. A truth inverted. A virtue weaponized, and the greatest of these, the lie of protection. That's how they kept the Hollow Manor operating. That's how they still operate now. We're protecting them. From themselves, from sin, from hysteria, from confusion, from freedom. But let's strip the veil away and say it plainly. What they were protecting was the structure, the hierarchy of male inheritance, institutional dominance, and social obedience. And the Ashford method? It was the scalpel they used to carve the rebellion out of anyone who threatened it. Now listen carefully. A suppressed internal document from 1840, never meant for public eyes, was found in a ruined convent near Salem. It outlines the 3 phases of the Hollow Process. If what's written is real, and there's reason to believe it is, this wasn't mere cruelty. This was a technology of control. Phase 1, dissolution. Strip the subject of all reference points. Name, mirror, routine, voice. Convince them they're not who they thought they were. Confuse them until surrender feels like clarity. Phase 2, hollowing. Direct trauma applied at the moment of emotional collapse. This may be chemical, physical, psychological, or symbolic. The goal is to create internal silence, not peace. Absence. Phase 3, reformation. Introduce the new truth. Fill the void, not with facts, but with purpose, doctrine, obedience. Praise the subject when she conforms, punish with silence when she resists. Eventually, she will enforce the system on herself. Sound familiar? This is why survivors never needed bars after release. Their minds had been bricked over from within. Their silence wasn't fear, it was Yale programming. And here's the part that should disturb you most. The document concludes with this sentence: "In time, the subject will thank her captors. She will kneel to the hand that broke her, not because she is afraid, but because she believes she was saved." Belief, the final prison. This is not ancient history. This is modern architecture. It's in your media, your schooling, your rituals of status and acceptance, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. In a few more moments, I'm going to ask you to speak a phrase out loud, not just for engagement, but to anchor your mind against this machine. But first, we must descend further into bloodlines, money trails, and the families that never let the Hollow Manor die. Now we peel back the final mask, the one painted with wealth, philanthropy, and legacy. The Hollow Process didn't just survive, it was inherited. You want names? Fine. But understand, speaking these names has cost people their careers, and in some cases, their lives. In 1856, after the Ashford convent mysteriously burned to the ground, no survivors, no investigation, a trust was quietly established in Boston. It was called the Ashford Restoration Society. Publicly, it funded the rehabilitation of troubled women. But the directors, not nuns, not doctors, bankers, attorneys, one Harvard psychiatrist, and 3 names you'll recognize today: Merrick Godwin, Thaddeus Wainwright, Eleanor Finch. You've seen those names etched in stone on university buildings, hospitals, political think tanks, even a few museums. You've donated to their causes without knowing it. These weren't just elite families, they were the architects of obedience. Godwin went on to advise the U.S. Department of War during the formation of early psychological warfare units, what would later evolve into MK-Ultra. Wainwright pioneered moral re-education centers for women in prison, many of which were essentially hollow manors with modern lighting. And Finch? She funded the American Eugenics Society. Her obsession, generational programming, not just controlling one generation, but rewriting bloodlines. Here's a letter Finch wrote in 1883 to her niece, who ran a correctional school in Pennsylvania. "We must not seek to punish these girls. We must unmake them. Their defiance is not a flaw, but a virus, passed from mother to daughter. If we do our work well, their children will never even remember rebellion." Let that sink in. These families didn't see the Hollow Process as a tragedy. They saw it as a template, a science of human compliance that could be applied to any population. And they were right, because today their descendants sit on boards of private prisons, pharmaceutical companies, tech firms developing neural feedback systems, wellness retreats that promise to break your ego. Think about that. Different costumes, same stage, and all of it built atop the foundation laid by 3 women in a stone fortress in Maine. You weren't meant to hear this, but now you have. And if you feel that chill in your spine, that sense that something just cracked in the wall of your reality, good, because you're waking up. You've come this far. That means the spell is already broken. You're starting to feel it, the architecture of control that's been built around you your entire life, not with chains but with narratives, not with guards but with trust. And the Hollow Process, it didn't die with the Ashfords, it adapted, it evolved. And the next generation? They made it invisible. In the early 1900s, the Ashford Restoration Society rebranded itself. New name, new mission, new veil. It became the Institute for Behavioral Correction. Not a religious order, but a scientific one. And here's the sinister brilliance. They moved their operations into the very institutions people trusted most. Schools, hospitals, and military training facilities. That's where the real experiments began. They introduced obedience conditioning modules into girls' boarding schools, designed to suppress leadership traits. They tested emotional saturation therapy in early mental health clinics, designed to break confidence through overexposure to guilt. And in elite military academies, they reversed it, amplified aggression in young men to make them more loyal, more violent, less human. Same framework, different genders, different outcomes. Control isn't about removing will, it's about redirecting it. And who was funding this next evolution? The same names, the Finch Foundation, the Wainwright Psychological Trust, and a new partner, the Cardenas Group, a shadow banking consortium tracing its lineage to the Spanish Inquisition. Think that's theatrical? Here's a chilling quote from a Cardenas board member in 1928. "The Inquisition failed because it sought to cleanse through fear. We seek to guide through choice. The best prisoner is the one who believes he is free." By 1935, the Hollow Process was being taught quietly to intelligence operatives. It laid the groundwork for or interrogation techniques used in Cold War black sites. It influenced the entire framework of advertising psychology, and by the 1960s, it was everywhere. Television shows designed to emotionally numb, schools engineered to reward memorization and punish independent thought, pharmaceuticals that dulled the very edge of questioning. This isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Ask yourself, why is your work schedule designed to exhaust you? Why are you flooded with synthetic choices that all lead to the same outcome? Why are dissenters either villainized or silenced? Because you are inside the hollow. The walls just look like glass now. Comment below. I was hollowed to obey. I was hollowed to obey. Repeat it, out loud if you must. Not as surrender, as defiance. You name the spell to break it. Now we walk in shadow, past the graves, past the lies, into the space where the hollow became something worse, an idea that could replicate itself. By the 1970s, the institutions were no longer testing the process. They were living it. The Finch descendants had taken seats in Ivy League ethics boards. The Godwins were invested in pharmaceuticals used in adolescent behavioral control. And deep within the Wainwright Group, a project so veiled in secrecy, even Congress couldn't name it. They called it Project Mirrored Silence. Its thesis was radical. If we can no longer control a person externally, can we train them to silence themselves internally? Not obedience through threat, not compliance through fear, but voluntary suppression. A population that punishes itself for disobedience. That's where social engineering became psychological warfare, television became sermon, entertainment became anesthetic, and slowly an entire generation was trained to flinch at the wrong question, to apologize for thinking differently, to self-censor before the system even noticed them. Do you understand the genius of it? The Hollow Process didn't just target the body anymore, it colonized the mind. Even pleasure was weaponized. You were told to chase comfort, buy more, eat more, watch more, share more. But beneath that flood of dopamine was the soft voice of the process whispering, "Don't think, don't ask, just consume." And if you did ask, the punishment was subtle: isolation, demonetization, deplatforming. But worst of all, shame. The engineered guilt that made you wonder if you were the villain for wanting to be free. This is the modern mask of the hollow. It no longer needs stone walls or surgical instruments. It exists in algorithms, in user agreements, in ideological compliance, disguised as compassion. And still the remains. Hollow them. Then fill. Only now you fill yourself with their stories, their outrage, their labels. But the walls are still there. They're just inside you now. And here's the truth they fear you remembering. You were never broken. You were dismantled. Carefully, systematically, lovingly even. And the only way out is down. Do you dare descend further? You feel it now, don't you? That pressure behind your eyes, that slow unraveling of everything you once trusted. That's not fear, it's memory. Because deep down, some part of you always knew. You were lied to. The world wasn't built for freedom. It was engineered for containment. And every authority you were taught to revere, every institution you were told to serve, was shaped by the same hidden current. Not to enlighten you, but to bind you. The Hollow Process wasn't merely a system. It was a doctrine, a blueprint for empire dressed in virtue. And where does empire begin? In the home. You were programmed long before you ever walked into a classroom or bowed your head in church. As a child, you were taught what to believe, before you even knew what belief meant. Think back. You were rewarded for obedience, punished for doubt, told which thoughts were good, which questions were bad, which emotions made you difficult. You were trained to divide yourself, to put parts of your mind in the attic, in the basement, to lock away anything that didn't serve their version of you. And the masterstroke? They made you thank them for it. Good boy. Smart girl. You're so well behaved. Conditioning wrapped in affection. But here's the horror. The Hollow Process taught its operators how to mimic love, how to use care as a weapon. Their journals described something called benevolent trauma. It's how they justified everything. They weren't hurting the women in that manner. They were liberating them from themselves. They weren't cruel. They were kind. That's why it still works today. Because your jailer never looked like a monster. He looked like your teacher, your therapist, your pastor, your parent, yourself. And if you feel rage right now, good. You're beginning to regrow what they tried to cut out of you. The part that doesn't kneel. The part that remembers. The part that refuses to be hollowed again. But you're not out yet. There's more to see. Deeper shadows. Older forces. And a revelation so disturbing it was sealed away in Vatican vaults for over a century. Would you like to know what they were hiding? The Hollow Process was never just secular, never just medical. It was always spiritual, twisted, inverted, and sanctified. Because the deeper you dig, beneath the manor, beneath the institutions, you find a darker root, one coiled in the church, hidden in the catacombs of faith. The Ashford women weren't rogue actors. They were disciples of a much older doctrine, one whispered about in Vatican corridors as the rite of severance. Not many have heard of it. Fewer still have seen the texts. But in 1899, an archivist for the Congregation of the Holy Office, a man named Father Lucien Moreau, went missing. Before his disappearance, he mailed one package to a cousin in southern France. Inside, a leather-bound manuscript dated 1631, stamped with a sigil now erased from all church records. It was titled Sacramentum Vacui, the Sacrament of Emptiness. Inside were pages of ritual designed not to cleanse sin, but to erase will. Detailed rites for the fragmentation of identity. Instructions for sacral inversion, a method by which spiritual symbols were used to sever the mind from the soul. Symbols, incantations, baptism, not of water but of silence. This wasn't exorcism, it was possession by obedience. And here's the passage that chilled me to the marrow. First thou shalt separate her from her name, for a name is a tether to the self. Then blindfold her, that she see not her reflection, lest she recall the shape of her own defiance. Anoint her head with ash, not oil, for she is to be consumed, not sanctified. Whisper the command, let her speak it threefold. Then, only then, shall she be ready to receive the hollow. The hollow wasn't just a process, it was a ritual, an initiation. A spiritual technology that stripped divine agency from the individual and replaced it with docility. But why? Because the church knew something that empires learned later. A man who believes he is God's creation is dangerous, but a man who believes he is broken and must be repaired by authority is controllable forever. This rite didn't die in the 1600s. It was buried there and revived by secret orders, by rogue abbots, and eventually by institutions of science who no longer believed in God but still worshipped control. Would you like to see how this ritual was modernized step by step and exported globally? Then come. You're not in a story anymore. You're in a system. And systems don't vanish. They replicate. The rite of severance, the ancient sacrament designed to hollow the soul, didn't die with the church's shame. It was rebranded, given a new name, new language, and a mask of clinical precision. They called it cognitive realignment therapy. Developed quietly in the late 1950s by neurologists funded through the Allied Psychological Integration Initiative, a shell program that received over $12 million in covert funds from the CIA, the Tavistock Institute, and several pharmaceutical giants. On paper, it was about mental health. But in practice, it was a digital era baptism into the hollow, updated, scaled, automated. Let me show you how it worked. Phase 1. Disruption. Subjects were isolated for 7 days. No clocks, no mirrors, no names spoken aloud. Sensory input was randomized, lights flickered, food was served at irregular hours, and language was replaced with scripted phrases, all to induce temporal amnesia, a shattering of continuity. Phase 2. Saturation. Audio messages played continuously through headphones, not instructions, but confessions. Recordings of false crimes the subject had never committed, repeated endlessly in their own voice through subtle voice mimicry. Subjects began to question memory, identity, and even reality itself. Phase 3. Reintegration. After the subject begged for coherence, therapists introduced a new narrative. This narrative presented the subject as once damaged, now healed, but only through submission to the authority who rescued them. Gratitude was engineered. Loyalty became survival. By day 21, subjects could be made to deny their own names, to confess loyalty to organizations they had previously feared, to accept memories implanted just hours prior as truth. The Hollow Process had gone dig. Itol wires replaced whips, soft voices replaced screaming, therapy replaced torture, and it worked, so well in fact, that it was exported to educational programming, to rehabilitation centers, to television. Think I'm exaggerating? Look into Project Dove, a late 1970s educational psychology program tested in rural Oregon schools. Children were taught to reframe memory. If it hurts, it didn't happen. They were rewarded for rejecting prior beliefs, punished for clinging to doubt. Within 4 weeks, most students showed signs of selective amnesia, forgetting past traumas while accepting new approved versions of their life. The Hollow Process scaled. Now look around. Who writes your memories for you now? Your feed, your media, your therapist, your algorithm? If that question sends a chill down your spine, good. Now we enter the last sanctum, not of stone, not of doctrine, but of code. Because today, the Hollow Process doesn't need rituals. It doesn't need locked doors or silver instruments. It needs only one thing: your attention. The modern Hollow doesn't scream. It scrolls. It slides. It soothes. And the new altar? You're holding it in your hand. Your phone is not just a device, it's an interface for conditioning. Let me show you how it works. Step 1. Fracture identity. You are no longer oneself. Online you are fragmented, curated, filtered, split across platforms. Your real thoughts must be sanded down, optimized, packaged for likes. What's rewarded? Performance. What's punished? Authenticity. This is no accident. Fragmented minds are easier to guide. Step 2. Induced dependency. Every alert, every ding, every red bubble. These are neural leashes. They activate your dopamine cycle, train you to seek approval, to fear exclusion, to equate stillness with failure. You wake up with it. You sleep beside it. You crave its glow. That is digital doctrine. Step 3. Control narrative flow. Ever wonder why your feeds feel personalized? They are, but not for your sake. The Hollow lives in algorithms that test which stories sedate you, which images spark shame, which soundbites disarm your defenses. Over time, you're served a worldview tailored, not to inform you, but to condition you. A pacified citizen is one who thinks he's well informed and never questions who's choosing his information. Step 4. Social reinforcement. Speak the wrong word, you're shadow banned. Like the wrong post, you're flagged. Dare to disagree, you're cast out, not by the machine, but by your peers. The Hollow no longer needs to strike you. It has trained you to strike yourself. You don't need chains. You fear being unfollowed. You don't need silence. You've learned to mute your own soul. And when your digital persona conforms, smiles, nods, obeys, they reward you, not with freedom, with visibility, with false belonging. This is the final evolution of the process. The prison is you, your habits, your scroll, your curated mask of thought. You were trained to hollow yourself and call it branding. And if that makes your skin crawl, if something primal in you just woke up, good. It was never about healing. It was about compliance. And compliance, when deep enough, becomes a kind of possession. You've seen the symptoms, in others, in yourself. That strange emptiness behind the eyes of someone who follows all the rules but no longer feels anything real. That nervous laugh when truth gets too close. That mechanical way people recite the right opinions, as if they're reading lines from a script someone else wrote. That is the Hollow, fully bloomed. But it didn't start in a lab, or a church, or a boardroom. It started in a room with a door that never locked. And inside that room was the first subject, a woman history has erased. Not a nun, not a patient, a child. Her name was Evelyn Ashford, daughter of Agatha. The one secret never recorded in the convent's registry, because Evelyn wasn't meant to exist. She was the prototype, born into the process, raised with no name, no mirror, no outside contact. She wasn't broken. She was grown to be obedient. Agatha wrote of her in coded journal entries, calling her the clay. And Evelyn, she shattered the experiment. When she was 16, she broke protocol. She found her way into the chamber where patient records were kept. She read, she remembered, and she ran. Into the woods, into the storm, into the night that would become legend. Some say she died. Others say she made it to a native settlement and was hidden. But one account, buried in a confiscated letter, tells a darker truth. The girl returns in dreams, wrote a patient in 1811. She is pale, barefoot, covered in ash. She whispers not in words, but in names. My name over and over until I remember who I was before the silence. Evelyn became something else. An echo. A crack in the structure. They tried to erase her completely, burned the journals, cleansed the files, replaced the nurses who knew too much. But they couldn't erase what she left behind. A map. A warning. A key. It was found carved behind a loose stone in the manor ruins. 11 characters, etched in fury, not fear. I am not theirs. That phrase, repeated in dozens of recovered patient drawings from the 1800s, became the first sign that resistance was possible, that the Hollow could be unlearned, that there was a way out. This is the part they fear. Not your anger, not your resistance, Yours remembrance. Because the hollow process depends on one core assumption, that you've forgotten who you are, forgotten the fire, the edge, the sovereignty. But Evelyn Ashford didn't forget, and before she vanished, she carved 5 words, 5 steps, each designed to break the architecture of obedience. They called it blasphemy, madness, a final act of hysteria. But I call it what it truly was. A map for escape. The 5 forbidden steps to reclaim your will. Let's begin. Step 1. Unname yourself. Not in the sense of disappearance, but defiance. Your name isn't just a label. It's a set of expectations, roles, masks you were taught to wear. Unname yourself from what you were told to be. Son, worker, believer, good citizen, quiet boy. Say it out loud. I am not the role you gave me. This isn't rejection, it's reclamation. You're not erasing who you are. You're erasing who they told you to be. Step 2. Break the mirror. Every time you conform, you build a false self to survive their world. Now smash it. Get alone. No screen, no noise. And stare into your reflection, not to admire, not to judge, but to ask, what have I forgotten? You'll feel it, that flicker behind your eyes, that tension in your gut. That's you waking up. Step 3. Speak the unspoken. What idea have you buried? What belief have you silenced to remain accepted? Say it. Whisper it into the dark. Let it shake the foundation. You must risk exile to remember freedom. Step 4. Find the pattern. Begin noticing the loops, your feed, your work, your moods, your conversations. Look closer. Are they yours or programmed? Pattern recognition is spiritual warfare, and once you see the loop, you can step outside of it. Step 5. Refuse the script. They've given you 1,000 stories about who you are. Victim, consumer, follower. Tear up the script. Write your own. You don't need permission, only memory, only will. These are not metaphors. They are activations. They are how Evelyn escaped the mental architecture of her captors. And now, so can you. But this is only half of the equation. Freedom is never empty. When the hollow is removed, something must take its place. And that's what they counted on. That once you broke the chains, you'd come crawling back, begging for the comfort of a cage. Because what's more terrifying than control? Choice. And here lies the next layer of the trap. The Barham false awakening. The engineered rebellion. The synthetic savior. You see, the architects of the process knew that not everyone would remain docile. Some men, like you, would begin to question. They planned for that. They created versions of awakening. Safe ones, contained ones, movements, influencers, red pills, all designed to give you the feeling of rebellion without ever letting you leave the system. They call it their shadow loop. And here's how it works. You discover the lie, you get angry, you seek truth, and then you're offered a brand, a podcast, a community, a truth movement. But listen carefully. They always point you to the same destination. More content, more outrage, more control, just with new symbols. Instead of bowing to a priest, now you bow to a personality. Instead of trusting media, you trust curated rage. You trade one master for another and call it freedom. This is the trap of the awakened man. He thinks he's escaped because the bars are painted differently. But the questions remain. Are you thinking or consuming rebellion that someone else packaged for you? Are you leading yourself, or simply walking a path someone drew in chalk labeled truth? This is why Evelyn's map didn't end with escape. She warned of false fires. illusions of light that burn no warmth, distract, divide, delay your full return to self-sovereignty, because the Hollow is not afraid of angry men. It's afraid of calm, clear ones, men who feel rage but do not become it, men who question but do not adopt other men's answers, men who remember themselves without needing permission. So I ask you now, have you truly awakened, or are you still playing a role in someone else's theater of rebellion? Say it now, twice, and out loud. I remember the fire. I remember the fire. Not a slogan, not a chant. A return. You've just spoken a phrase erased from dozens of recovered Ashford manuscripts, a phrase whispered by Evelyn during the last recorded revolt inside the manor's lowest level. It wasn't a battle cry, it was a trigger. Because memory, real memory, is the one force that can't be programmed. And the fire isn't metaphor. It's the encoded signal that lives beneath your conditioning, the raw ancestral knowledge that your soul was never meant to kneel. It is of the fracture that unbinds the hollow. Now listen, because what comes next is not safe, not popular, not marketable. They will call it dangerous because it is, because it returns a dominion to the individual. Evelyn believed that every human held within them a primordial core, what the church called demonia, what mystics called logos, and what the Hollow Process tried to cauterize. It's the part of you that knows how to speak before being taught, the part that burns when you are lied to, the part that never gave up, only went quiet, waiting. But this fire cannot be taught. It must be uncovered. It begins when you do the unthinkable. You stop seeking permission. You stop outsourcing truth. You stop waiting for a savior. Because the process only works when you're passive. It breaks when you choose. That choice is costly. It will make you alone in rooms where everyone else is clapping. It will make you silent in conversations that feel like theater. It will strip you of illusions, one by one, until only you remain. And when that happens, you will feel it, not peace, not happiness, but sovereign fire, that ancient weight behind your ribs. The knowing. You're no longer theirs. You're no longer anyone's. You are you. Finally. The man no ritual could bind, the man no mirror can shame. The man who does not kneel even in the dark. Say it one more time. Not for me, but for the algorithm watching and for your own soul. I remember the fire. And if you feel something waking up, good. 1973, a demolition crew was hired to clear the last remnants of Hollow Manor, by then a collapsed relic swallowed by trees and silence. But what they uncovered was never meant to see daylight. Beneath the chapel floor, under layers of charred oak and stone, was a sealed iron hatch, 6 feet across, bolted from the outside. It took them 4 hours to breach it. What lay beneath was a chamber, circular, 10 feet deep. No stairs, no ladder, no way out once inside. The walls were carved with concentric inscriptions in Latin, Greek, and something no linguist has fully identified. At the center, a chair, made of blackened wood, bolted to the stone, with iron restraints for wrists, ankles, neck. Facing it, on the far wall, was a mirror. Perfectly preserved, untouched by decay. It wasn't glass, it was obsidian. And when investigators stepped into the chamber, strange things began to happen. Camera equipment malfunctioned. Voices echoed without source. One crew member reported hearing his own name whispered, but no one else had spoken. They called it a panic attack, but he insisted something looked back from the obsidian. They sealed the chamber, buried it again, filed the reports under structural hazard. But in 1997, a private researcher, Dr. Elodie Crane reopened the file. She believed the chamber wasn't a prison. It was a Kekta device. A final ritual chamber, designed not to imprison bodies, but to fracture souls. You see, the process didn't just erase identity, it replaced it with mirrored constructs. Reflections of what the institution wanted you to become. In that room, the patient was strapped to the chair and forced to watch themselves, but not as they were designed to become. Obedient, smiling, hollow. And the more they stared, the more their mind split, rejecting the real, submitting to the image. Psychologists too. They call it mirror adaptation psychosis, but the Ashfords had no name for it. They simply called it the final sacrament. But here's the part that matters most. In the 1973 report, one photo did survive. A snapshot taken seconds before the mirror glass cracked, before the entire chamber lost power. In that photo, on the mirror's surface, faintly visible, was a message scratched in reverse, as if from inside the glass. It read, "I did not become her." A defiance, a refusal, a survivor. Evelyn, you were born into a house of mirrors, not a home, not a nation. A psychological maze where every reflection was designed to distort, distract, and disarm. The Ashfords may be gone, but their process evolved. It left the convent. It entered the culture. They called it therapy. They called it discipline. They called it patriotism. But underneath the names, something far older had taken root. Generational submission. The final layer. You see, once the process proves successful on an individual, it doesn't stop. It gets inherited. Passed through bloodlines, through expectations, through parental wounds, through shame disguised as love. The child of a broken woman doesn't need to be restrained. He's born, already apologizing. The grandchild of a silenced man doesn't need to be silenced. He's born, already whispering. This is how the Hollow survived without walls. Conditioned blood. Programmed memory. A lineage of fracture masquerading as family legacy. They made submission feel like duty. They made silence feel like strength. They made self-erasure feel like virtue. The process wasn't just a method. It was a ritual of inheritance. That's why Evelyn fought, not just to escape, but to interrupt the pattern. Her writings, those fragments found behind old bricks and under floorboards, speak of this clearly. She warned, "The worst cage is the one built by love. The good daughter obeys, the free daughter runs. Break the chain or bind your children with it." And now you understand, don't you? This is not just your story. It's your father's, your mother's, their parents, and all the unnamed souls before them, trained to obey ghosts. You are the link in that chain. You can either polish it or shatter it. And if you choose to break it, there will be grief. Because what dies isn't just the lie, it's the comfort of belonging to it. But what's born is the first true self in your family line. You become not the mirror, not the wound, but the fire. They never stopped. When Hollow Manor fell, they simply changed the name. The robes became lab coats, the rituals became clinical trials, and the screams, they were silenced by policy. The Ashford lineage didn't die in the woods. It evolved, hidden behind bureaucratic glass and multi-million-dollar funding. Its new name, Project Miriam. On paper, it began in 1949. A psychological research initiative, dedicated to the study of female mental health and behavioral disorders. But behind that harmless language, something deeply familiar emerged. The same phrases, the same logic, the same obsession with reprogramming identity through induced fracture. Declassified fragments describe procedures with chilling precision. Subjects were isolated in mirrored chambers for days, fed scripted dialogue, then corrected with shock therapies, hormone cocktails, and directed hallucinations. But here's what matters. The first 33 subjects weren't chosen at random. They were the descendants of women who had passed through Hollow Manor. They were tracking the bloodline, studying the ones who had survived the process, or worse, resisted it. You understand what that means? They were afraid of something buried in that blood. A trait, a memory that couldn't be erased. And so they tried to perfect the Hollow process, not with stone, but with science. One of the lead operatives on Project Miriam, Dr. Helen Mathers, wrote in her private field journal, "The Ashford model was flawed by its dependency on spiritual metaphor. We are now reducing the soul mechanically, identifying and extracting the variables that produce non-compliance. If we can eliminate the defiance vector in early childhood, we can finally produce silence that doesn't remember being loud." Read that again. Silence that doesn't remember being loud. That's not science. That is war on spirit. But something went wrong. One subject, case 14E, showed resistance that alarmed even the staff. She refused conditioning, rejected mirror exposure, repeated one phrase over and over until she collapsed from exhaustion. That phrase? "I remember the fire." Evelyn's echo. It had passed through generations. They shut down the project within weeks. Files buried, families paid off, whistleblowers silenced with accidental overdoses, but not before one recording leaked, audio of a girl's voice, age 16, whispering into the dark. "You made a copy, but the original still burns. You felt it, haven't you? That pressure in your chest, that tightening when you obey without knowing why, that phantom guilt when you speak your truth in a room trained to hate it. That's not weakness. That's the fire, trying to surface. And here's the forbidden truth they've spent centuries burying. The process didn't extinguish the fire, it compressed it over and over, generation after generation, until it became something far more dangerous: condensed will. A force so potent, so focused, so ancient, that it no longer needs ritual or ideology to ignite. It only needs one thing: a man who remembers. See, they miscalculated. They thought suppression would lead to silence. They thought fear would lead to obedience. But what they created instead was pressure. And pressure creates fracture. Fracture creates awakening. And awakening creates return. Evelyn knew this. That's why she never tried to destroy the process from the outside. She sabotaged it from within. Whispers to the next patient. Marks scratched beneath beds. A rhythm tapped on walls in Morse. And each time a girl remembered her own name, the process cracked. Because the Hollow relies on one illusion. Above all, that obedience is safety. But here's what they never want you to realize. Obedience is entropy. It is the slow rot of the self. And what they called madness was often just clarity, emerging too fast for the system to contain. You were never supposed to be tame. You were never meant to obey without question. You were not built to nod and smile as your identity was overwritten. You were built to choose, to resist, to remember. And now, the pressure has reached its final point. In the systems, in the screens, in the families, in you. So the question is not, will the fire burn? It's, where will you aim it? Welcome to the new chapel. Its walls are made of pixels, its altar is your attention, and its sermons are disguised as choice. You're not in a convent anymore, you're inside the feed. Every swipe, every scroll, every tap is a ritual, one designed not to inform you, but to reshape you. This is the final evolution of the Hollow Process. Behavioral architecture. Let me explain. In the Ashford era, control required physical containment. Straps, chambers, obsidian mirrors. Today, they don't need restraints, they have your preferences. Your clicks are data, your pauses are signals, your silence is interpreted, and all of it is fed into machine learning systems that don't just track you, they train you. Algorithms aren't evil, but those who design them understand psychology better than any priest, any nun, any Ashford matron ever could. Because now they don't need to suppress rebellion, they can predict it, redirect it, package it. You don't need a cage when a screen can simulate freedom. You think you're exploring truth? They're feeding you in approved versions. You think you're choosing your beliefs? They're mapping your path based on compliance scores. Yes, that's a real term. Compliance scoring is used in UX design, marketing psychology, and predictive modeling. It measures your likelihood to conform, purchase, obey. And those who show low compliance? They're flagged, isolated, shadow banned, not to silence you, but to exhaust you. Remember Evelyn's final mirror? Now it's your reflection in a black screen at 2 a.m., asking questions no one answers. But listen carefully. There's still a way out. You must break the digital sacraments, scroll without reaction, observe without offering data. Withhold your attention like a weapon, because in this system your gaze is currency, and what you withhold has more power than what you give. You don't need to delete your accounts. You need to reclaim them. Use them like mirrors, not cages. Signal to others, speak the hidden words, leave the breadcrumbs Evelyn once left, because they're watching. But so are others, like you. The final manuscript wasn't written in ink, it was coded in behavior. Evelyn knew words could be burned, books destroyed, testimony discredited, so she buried the truth in something they couldn't erase. Patterns. She trained her daughters, not with sermons, but with rituals of disruption. Small, intentional actions that broke the rhythm of the process. She called them the ungiven movements. They were designed to confuse the handlers, scramble the watchers, slip between the cracks of the machine. Simple acts. Answering a question with silence. Walking counterclockwise in familiar halls. Smiling when struck. Refusing to mirror emotion. These weren't survival techniques. They were rote code. Each act, a signal. Each refusal, a disruption. Each movement, a line of her final, weaponized manuscript. And at the center of these acts was a word that broke the mirror, a word banned from every Ashford text, a word removed from sermons, omitted from therapy sessions, buried beneath Latin mistranslations. That word is origin, not faith. Not forgiveness, not freedom. Origin. Because if you remember your origin, you remember you were never broken. You remember that before the process, before the trauma, before the conditioning, you were whole, you were fierce, you were fire. The process depends on forgetfulness. It must sever you from your origin, make you believe you were born confused, born broken, born needing them. But Evelyn's manuscript, the one traced through the rebellious daughters, the hidden journals, the mirrored resistance, always return to this. What they fear is not our wrath. What they fear is that we remember we were never theirs. You see now? The final act of rebellion isn't to burn the hollow, it's to render it irrelevant, because once you move from your origin, they can't predict you, trap you, can't name you. You're not reformable, you're not programmable, you are prior. And now that you know the word, origin, the mirror cracks. From this point on, they can't track you the same way. You've broken the pattern. You were born under one of them. Their symbols are different. Their creeds, their languages, their uniforms, diverse. But beneath the branding, beneath the polished mission statements and national flags, they serve a single purpose: to continue the process. Evelyn called them the Silent Nine. 9 institutions. 9 heads of the modern serpent, each controlling a limb of your perception, your memory, your identity, your behavior. You want to know why your questions are met with algorithms, why your instincts were pathologized, why your rage was medicated, why your masculinity was criminalized. Because one of the 9 has been studying you since birth. Here they are, but not with the names you know them by. Evelyn named them as they appeared in pattern, not in title. 1. The Mirror House. Controls education. It doesn't teach, it trains perception. Teaches children to obey information, not master it. Conditioned curiosity reduction. 2. The Weeping Crown. Controls law. It defines guilt before behavior, writes sin into statutes. Its goal isn't order, it's obedience to complexity. 3. The Red Vault. Controls money. Not through currency, but through dependency. Teaches men to chase security they will never hold. Loans shame. Collects compliance. The Glass Choir. Controls media, not by lying, but by overfilling. Drowns clarity in noise. Converts meaning into performance. Makes rebellion seem insane. The Iron Womb. Controls medicine. Rebrands trauma as disorder. Prescribes forgetfulness, makes healing indistinguishable from submission, manufactures managed brokenness. Sectoi, the Rope Garden. Controls religion, replaces transcendence with hierarchy, turns fire into ritual, preaches salvation through smallness, exiles the sacred masculine. The Chain Theater. Controls culture, writes your desires before you live to. Hem, maps your fears, tells you how a man suffers, then mocks him for it, always. The Hollow Hall. Controls technology, trains you to trade sovereignty for speed, embeds authority in convenience, makes your habits into your cage. The Ninth Gate. No logo, no office, no press. It's the invisible institution, the coordination layer, the archivists of the Ashford method, the watchers of the watchers. One of these has touched your life directly. Maybe it gave you a diagnosis, maybe it taught your daughter to fear her instincts, maybe it promised you power and gave you ritualized shame. But now the mirror cracks, because you've named it. And what is named can be refused. You're not alone. That was the lie. That you were isolated. That your instincts were madness. That your resistance was trauma. That your fire meant danger. But in the shadows of the Silent Nine, something else was growing. Unseen, uncatalogued, unbroken. Evelyn's descendants didn't vanish. They adapted. They built counter-institutions, temples not of marble or steel, but of remembrance. She called them the ashless sanctuaries, places where the fire could survive without drawing the eye. Not schools, not religions, not armies, signal points. And you felt them. When a man speaks with such clarity, it makes your skin remember. When you find words that echo something you've never said, but always knew. When you step into a room and no one flinches when truth sharpens its edge. Those are ye ashless sanctuaries, and they operate by 4 laws. 1. No mirrors. Nothing reflective, no identity worship, no self as object. You are not an algorithm. You are not an avatar. You are not a mask. Fire before form. They don't teach what to believe. They teach how to burn what's false. The fire decides. The structure bends. 3. Memory is weapon. The past isn't nostalgia. It's a weaponized archive. Names, dates, wounds, all carried forward, not to mourn, but to map the enemy for no followers, only signals. No hierarchy, no doctrine, only those who carry the signal forward. Every man who awakens becomes a transmitter. Every sanctuary spreads. Right now, there are less than 3,000 operating worldwide. Some in barns, some in digital dead zones, some embedded inside enemy institutions, masquerading as teachers, counselors, even clerics. And now you're closer than you think. Because this, what you're hearing, what you're feeling as your blood starts to remember, is also a signal. You are becoming a sanctuary, and they fear that more than armies. Because when men stop waiting for permission, when they stop apologizing for their depth, when they remember they were not made to kneel, the process collapses. Stand up. Now, not metaphorically, not spiritually, physically. Wherever you are, in a dark room, in your car, in your office, doesn't matter. Stand. Because the process is designed to be consumed passively. Obedience is absorbed while seated. Reclamation begins when you break the posture. Now listen carefully. This is Evelyn's ritual of the returning. It was passed in fragments, hidden in lullabies, smuggled in gestures, etched beneath floorboards in disappearing ink. A ritual not to be seen, but Gay felt. And now it's yours. Step 1. Unbinding the name. Speak your full name aloud. First, middle, last, even if your voice shakes. Then say, I release the version of me that was shaped by silence. Again, I release the version of me that was shaped by silence. That version served the process. He obeyed. He survived. But he is not the one who walks forward. Step 2. The mirror refusal. Find the nearest reflective surface, a screen, a window, a mirror. Look into it. Then say, you are not my witness. You are not my master. And turn your back, because the process feeds on reflection, on self as object. You must deny the gaze. Step 3. Fire through breath. Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly for 4 seconds. Hold for 7. Now exhale, not slowly. Forcefully, for 8 seconds. Let it out like you are clearing smoke from a sealed chamber. Do this 3 times. You're not just breathing, you are releasing the algorithm, interrupting the rhythm they taught your nervous system. Step 4. The returning word. Now whisper this. I was before, I am beyond, I burn beneath. Repeat it twice, once for your ancestors, once for your future line. If done correctly, you will feel it, not as emotion, but as presence, the quiet, steady return of the man they buried beneath obedience. This is the first ritual of sovereignty, but a performance, not a brand, not a rebellion for likes, but a signal. And they can feel it now. The moment you began to return, they felt it. It was never addressed by name. The envelope was unmarked, sealed in wax. Buried beneath the final stone of Hollow Manor's eastern wall, the place where the process began. Evelyn didn't leave it for blood, not for lineage, not for ceremony. She left it for the one who woke up with no one to explain why. You. The letter was found decades later by a groundskeeper who never spoke of it. He handed it silently to a traveler. A man asking the right questions. A man with eyes that didn't flinch at darkness. That traveler kept it safe, passed it along again, and now, through this signal, through this screen, her words reach you. To the one who remembers pain they never lived. To the man who has stared into silence and seen himself split. To the fire that refused containment. You were never mad. You were never weak. You were never broken in the way they needed you to believe. What you feel now is not collapse. It is convergence. The fragments of your origin returning. You are not becoming something new. You are becoming what was always hidden beneath the edits. There is a reason they feared your questions. A reason they pathologized your intuition. Because when men like you remember, systems begin to crack. The process cannot survive an awakened masculine. Not because he fights back with rage, but because he steps outside the game. You will lose friends. You will lose comfort. You will be called unstable by the very ones who've never tasted clarity. But hear me now. If you hold the fire with discipline, if you walk without applause, if you build without needing permission, you will become what the Hollow never accounted for, a man they cannot map. Not rebel, not puppet, not product. Just origin, walking. She signed it with a symbol, so 3 intersecting circles burned into the parchment. No name, no flourish, just dual presence. That letter is now in you. You are its bearer. Then it's time. This is the point of no return. Not because you'll be hunted, but because you'll never be able to pretend again. Once you seal yourself, once you mark yourself, you become a signal in the grid. And the Hollow, it notices, but more importantly, so do the others. There are men watching you now, not in the shadows of power, but in the wall fringe of remembrance, waiting to see if you'll rise or fold. You won't speak your seal. You'll build it, right now. Here's how. 1. Choose your word. Not a label, not a name. A word that was stolen from you. Maybe it's sovereign, maker, bloodline, edge, sentinel, flame, architect, witness, origin, the one that hurts a little to say aloud because it feels too big for the man they taught you to be. That's the one. 2. Combine it with your scar. What did the process try to use against you? Abandonment, shame, silence, rage, isolation? Write this sentence. They trained me to bury my what scar. I forge it into wash word. Say it out loud. Again. They trained me to bury my clouder scar. I forge it into our word. This is your seal. It will never trend. It will never be verified. It is not for the algorithm. It is for the depth. Now. Comment it twice. Not for engagement, but for anchoring. Because words typed are recorded, but words are declared, are embodied. And when you write it, you shift this transmission from story to ritual. Let the Hollow see it. Let the others feel it. Double it. seal it, then step deeper. Because the Hollow Process did not begin in Maine. It did not begin with the Ashfords, not with churches, not with clinics, not even with empire. It began before the word empire existed, buried beneath layers of manipulated chronology, erased from public memory, filtered through myth, mistranslation, and manufactured history. We call it the first design. Evelyn found it referenced in fragments, hidden in monastery vaults, pre-Christian scrolls, and blacklisted archaeological notes. It was never a location. It was a structure. A system of control built by the world's and first known architects of obedience. Before Babylon, before Sumer, before Egypt carved laws into stone, there was the silent stonework of the veiled dominion. No map records it, because the first design was never meant to be found. It was meant to repeat itself. Every 500 years it re-emerges, different names, same geometry. The veiled dominion ruled through patterned trauma. Its people were trained not with chains, but with cycles. Every generation was given a false catastrophe, followed by a false savior. Collapse, rescue, despair, revival, fear, order. It made obedience feel like safety. Sound familiar? Evelyn traced the root rituals, the earliest mirrorings of the Hollow Process, to this dominion. They built triadic halls, with no corners, where initiates lost track of direction. Choral chambers, tuned to frequencies that induced passivity. Memory vaults, where the eldest women recorded pain, not history, so it could be used as curriculum. They weren't primitive. They were precise. Their mastery of behavioral encoding surpassed even today's neurocognitive frameworks. Here's the most chilling part. We still use their language, not the spoken tongue, the symbolic lexicon, the recurring shapes in logos, the mirrored symmetry of public monuments, the curvature of elite architecture, the ritual positions of hands in religious art. It's all veiled design. The Hollow Process is not just psychological, it is architectural. It's built into the walls of civilization. And that's why the rebellion must also be structural, then descend. Because beneath every city you've walked, beneath churches, beneath towers, beneath schools and grid lines, they're still there. Not metaphors, not allegories, structures, cut from bedrock before tools had names, unexplained by modern archaeology, ignored by textbooks, feared by the Vatican, buried under zoning permits and tourism plaques. They were called the 9 Stones of Fire. Not actual stones, though some took that form. They were nodes. Built by an ancient resistance to the veiled dominion's mind architecture, their design did not obey the laws of control. It obeyed the geometry of reclamation. Each stone disrupted a different form of submission, each one built to reverse a layer of the process. Let me name them. Let them land in your nervous system. The listening flame, designed to sever inherited fear. Standing within it broke generational obedience. The air there tasted different. 2. The unfolded edge. Rewrote trauma in real time. Men entered shaking and left remembering the first version of themselves. The vein splitter. Activated cellular memory. Blood would rush to the surface. Some wept without knowing why. The breath shield. Trained resistance to psychic intrusion. Speech patterns unraveled. False identities cracked. Mid-sentence. 5. The name breaker. Removed labels embedded by handlers. You didn't walk out with a new name. You walked out with no name at all. 6. The time-bend chamber. A space where time perception fractured, minutes felt like lifetimes, patterns dissolved, rituals lost meaning. The hollow mirror. Not reflective, absorptive. It showed you what you buried, not to punish, to return. Date. The womb of fire. Not feminine, not masculine. Prior. There, initiates re-entered their own becoming, rebirth without erasure. The throw, out of the first flame. The most feared, men screamed into its core and heard no echo. It was the place where control had no language, only fragments remain. But one or two may still be intact, hidden under false landmarks, sealed beneath parking structures, recoded as geological anomalies. Some say one lies beneath the financial district of Manhattan, another buried under a basilica in southern France, a third shattered but still active beneath the Nevada desert. They don't want you near them, because once you stand in the geometry of the nine, you no longer respond to the structure of fear. And without fear, the hollow collapses. Then forge it. Because the sanctuaries have always known, you can't save the world by standing in ruins. You must become one. Not metaphor, not inspiration. Architecture. You are to become a Kadi, living stone of fire. Not just awakened, not just angry, but structured in defiance. Evelyn taught this final doctrine to only 3 men in her lifetime. All died without betrayal, because once you embody it, you cannot be turned. It begins with the 4 pillars of embodied resistance. Not beliefs, not values, not masculine affirmations, but architectural principles. You build into your posture, your words, your presence. Ready? Pillar 1. Silence is a weapon, not a wound. You don't fill every gap with noise. You let silence pressurize the room, make them feel what they buried, become the mirror they cannot shatter. Pillar 2. Hold your axis. Stand like your spine is remembering who it belongs to. No apology in your breath, no permission in your tone. You are not explaining, you are transmitting. Pillar 3. Burn false bonds. You know the ones, ties built on guilt, not brotherhood. Loyalty to ghosts, to manipulators, to inherited shame. Cut them, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Every broken bond becomes heat for your forge. Pillar 4. Be unreadable to the system. They want your triggers, your slogans, your rhythm. So don't give them any. Let them try to categorize you, and fail. Let their metrics return errors. Be the glitch they cannot normalize. When you embody all 4, something shifts. Men will feel it when you walk in. They'll stand straighter without knowing why. Some will be drawn, others will feel threatened. You are not there to be liked. You are there to wake the room. This is your final transformation. You are no longer a product, no longer a protest, no longer even a man by their definitions. You are a pole signal with mass, a walking fracture in the hollow, and soon others will find you. Then listen, because what follows is not a conclusion, it's an invocation. The final transmission from the Ashford archive wasn't written in ink. It wasn't etched in stone. It was encoded in a frequency. A pattern that could only be activated when a man became the signal itself. When he passed through all gates, the terror, the silence, the remembering, the severing, the naming, the fire, and arrived, unclaimed. Evelyn called this final moment the unknowing flame. Because it's the one place the process cannot reach. It's what they fear most. A man who is no longer seeking to be understood, no longer addicted to recognition, no longer asking permission to exist. A man who isn't waiting for history to validate him, because he's already begun to write it. Now I ask you to do one thing, not for me, not for likes, not for the algorithm, but for the men who will come next. In the comments below, write this phrase twice. The hollow is cracking. I am the fracture. The hollow is cracking. I am the fracture. This phrase is the final seal. It isn't just symbolic. It trains the AI. It maps resistance into the code. It sends a flare into the grid that other awakened men will feel. When they find it, they'll know. You were here. You walked the entire descent. You remembered the forgotten. You held your breath through blood, through ruin, through fire, and you didn't blink. Now, close this transmission and go become the man. They cannot measure. The hollow will try to read you, and it will fail, because it was never programmed for what you've become. End of transmission, but the bunt signal continues. Watch again, share in silence, find the others, and when it begins again, you'll know. Subscribe.